Hello and welcome to the next video where we are going to be talking about the REST APIs, how to communicate with them. This time what I want to do is to make sort of a showcase so that you can actually see how it looks like whenever we are writing some more complicated code, more complex code, and we add more functionalities, because the only one that we have covered in the last video was actually get. So in this video what I want to do is use a sample REST API that we can then present and see what we can do with it. So right now, as you can see, we've got this list of endpoints and list of requests that we can make. So we are going to be using RESTful API.dev, where we get a list of objects, list of objects by IDs, a single object, adding object, updating and partially updating and deleting object. You can always search just a free API in the Google and some free APIs will show up for you that you can test out your code on. So let's try and imitate as many of these methods as possible. I will be covering today the gets, the posts and the deletes. So essentially what we will be doing is trying to create a sort of a simple CRUD, so create, read, update, delete service so that we can communicate with the REST API. So first of all, let's just get all objects. So with that being said, let's just move on to the IntelliJ and let's see what we need to change to actually start working on this particular REST API. So here we've got our method that actually just gets the response, and then we don't really have much information about it, right? We do not return it, we don't see much, and in main we see that this is essentially what we have gotten, right? So it's essentially the same, but just put into a method. So let's see in our API handler, in our class that creates an HTTP client and then creates a request of a get type and then just returns a response. So let's now put the address that we have there. In our REST API, we got our HTTP client and we want to return a string, or rather maybe not a string, but the HTTP response of the type string. And let's return the response. Let's see how it behaves. So let's delete all of that, create a new API handler, and let's print out handler.status code. Let's see what happens. We've got a 404, means that I messed something up with the API call. So let's copy and paste it that way. And now we get a 200, so it means that it works. Let's also print out the body of the response. And actually, this is what we are getting. So we've got this 200 as a status code, and then we've got all the information about objects returned from the REST API. So we've got our get code, but this is something that we have already done in the past whenever we were talking about the REST APIs. So let's try and get a single object out of the API. So in order to get a single object, what we need to do, looking at the documentation, is we need to just adjust the request so that we are then sending it to the specific ID. So in order to do that, what we'll need to do in our API handler, I'll create a new method. We'll rename this one using Shift F6, get all objects, so that it's easier to differentiate the method. Let's create another one that returns HTTP response of string. Just a reminder, we do it that way, the HTTP response of string, because the body of the response is indeed of string type. Get object by ID, int ID. And what we'll do is we'll actually copy and paste quite a lot of this code, but what we will add here is just our ID. So you can imagine that it would be much easier to actually create a method that would have this URI as a variable. But let's see how our getObjectById works. If we just added this simple parameter, we also need to add a slash over here so that it maps properly. And let's see how it behaves. Let's print out handler that getObjectById 7. Okay, and now let's not be stupid and print out the body of it. So we've got our 7th number with the ID, so everything is working properly. And in the future, whenever you're writing out connection to the REST APIs, please do remember that actually how it works is that for the most part, whenever we're talking about arguments when talking to the REST API, you just need to add them to the URL that you are sending the request to so that it's easier for you in the future. Now let's see how to do a post. So let's check it out in our browser, in our documentation. So for a post, we need to be using this URL, and we'll need to put up a body, right? So this will be the body that we want to put up. Maybe we can change things around because in reality, the actual post will not work. It will be simulated that it actually has worked, and we'll get a response that everything is working properly. But this is a REST API that is being used by many developers, not only myself, meaning that if they were to actually implement a proper saving of objects into their REST API and into their database that is underneath, that is being used by the REST API rather, then it would be very costly and it would be very hard to do, and they wouldn't be able to control what is being added. So that's why it's just mocking it and simulating the addition of the objects. So we've got the URL, we've got the request. So let's create a method to actually use it. So let's switch to IntelliJ. What we'll be doing is another method of HTTP response string at object. Let's put in here object JSON. And what we'll need to do, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste quite a lot of it. And what we'll need to do is, first of all, change out this URL. We don't need the ID anymore. The request will be changing, but I will do it in just a second because I'm really starting to dislike how it looks like in our code. We need to clean it up. First of all, we're building quite a lot of clients. So let's create this client as a field so that every single field will be using it, so that we don't need another one. So that's one thing. And now all the catches are handling the exception in the same way. So let's then just collapse it. And now we are saving quite a lot of lines. Okay, it's looking a little bit better, and quite a lot of code has been reduced. So right now we've got our add object. Let's make the builder for the request a little bit more readable. So yes, right now what we know is that we won't be using a get, because if we use a get with this particular address, then we'll get the response as we do in here. What I want to do is change it to post and add a body publisher of string, and here we'll put our object JSON. So essentially this is a way of saying, yeah, please do input this object JSON and include it as the payload of the request of the post. So let's see whether it is going to work or not. add object. Let's copy and paste the JSON from the web page. And to make sure that it works properly, I'm going to say it's not Apple MacBook, but rather it's going to be a pair MacBook. And we are going to be printing out the body of the response that we have gotten. Let's see if it worked. Unsupported media type. So what it means is that we still need to specify what is the media type. And in order to do that is we need to set up the content type of our request to be equal to application/JSON. So we talked about headers a little bit in the past, and headers are actually what we are using to tell the REST API what is the format, what data are we using, and what to expect out of us. So this is precisely what has happened. We didn't pass the check of actually saying to them what is the media type that we want to put there. So let's add a header. It's called content type. And the value is going to be application/JSON as I'm being told over here. So to add a header, we just put that header. You can also add multiple ones by using that headers. But I want to put in just a single one so that works properly. So even though the data that I have put here is in JSON format, the REST API does not really believe me as long as I did not put in a proper content type. So let's run our main. And here you can see that it has been added with this particular ID, and I've got this information back. So it means that everything has worked properly. My thing has been added. It has been created at this specific timestamp, so everything is working nicely. So the last request that we want to actually handle right now is going to be deletion. So let's see what we need to do with a delete. We need to put in an ID, no body, as we can see over here, and we need to use a delete type of request. So let's do just that in our IntelliJ. We go back to the API handler. We are going to be once again copying quite a bit. Right now I'm worrying about making it work. I'm going to make it pretty and more readable in just a second. We're going to be using int ID. Let's delete all of that. Here what I will need to do is add my ID as I did just before. And what is left for me to do is actually just set the request type to that delete. So let's try deleting the object. Okay, and delete object ID of 7. And yeah, this error was not found, and a simple mistake, we forgot about slash at the end over here. Okay, your new object, and try to send it with new generated object ID. So a bit of a surprise. It means that we first need to create an object of ours, and the 7 is actually a reserved API in our API for objects which are there to stay. So what we need to do to fix this is first of all, create an object, and let's put in the object JSON that we have just used a little bit before. And how it's going to look like is just like this. Let's put in it's a pair. And after I run this code, what I get is this particular ID. I'll copy it. And how it is going to work is, first of all, let's change this string, because it seems that it only works on strings, not on ints. And then I've copied over the ID. So what I need to do is delete object and copy and paste the ID value that I've got over here. So let's run the code now. And I see that the object has been deleted, everything is working properly, and I can simulate everything that I want. So yeah, it is working very, very nicely. That would be pretty much it. With the knowledge that you have gotten from this video, you will be able to create a really, really simple CRUD. If I wanted to optimize the code over here, you can see that essentially for those requests, for gets, it's actually all the same, meaning that I could just create a method that would take in the URI, or rather maybe just the string that will be used for URI creation. And then I could, for posts and deletes, unfortunately I can't really change much over here because of a change to request. Or maybe I could just use request as the argument of the method that I would then be using. So it would basically look something like this. I would create a private method. And then what it would do is it would return HTTP response, create and send request, and it's going to be taking HTTP request as an argument, and essentially what it would do is do something along those lines, and we can delete URI syntax exception. And with that, I can just do something like this. Create a send request, and I can delete even those exceptions. So it's a bit cleaner with this method. I'm deleting those two, but still the request creation is something that I need to have separately due to the fact that actually they are changing from method to method. So if you want to do it like this, it also works. So with that being said, thank you very much and see you in the next video.